welcome to Epiphytic Cacti. Today let's take a look at Rhipsalis Dissimilis. This is more the standard form of Dissimilis. Things with Rhipsalis Dissimilis in general are kind of messed up. There are two forms, supposedly, of Rhipsalis Dissimilis. The standard form, which is what this one is supposed to be more like, and then there is form epiphyllanthoides. And we'll talk about epiphyllanthoides a little bit, but like not too much because this video is really about Dissimilis, but I do kind of want to highlight the oddity in the species in general. The issues arise reviewing the descriptions. So starting with the description back in the Cactaceae by Britton and Rose, it has kind of a bizarre description. A description that just seems a little bit sketchy. So I think that what was going on here is that the way that some of it's being described, I think that they were trying to describe Rhipsalis pacheco-leonis. Now, I know that the plates, you can take a look here. So I know that the plates were attributed later on to these actually being Rhipsalis pacheco-leonis, but it's interesting what it says for Rhipsalis dissimilis. So reading the description, it was described in 1890, and it says, in clumps on large limbs of trees and freely rooting, branches very diverse, some with numerous bristly hairs from the areoles, others naked, erect, prostrate, or even hanging. Hairy branches with 9 very low ribs, the areoles close together, each with about 15 long white bristles. Glabrous branches, 5-angled with the areoles alternating as in Rhipsalis paradoxa. Flower buds, red. Flowers solitary, about 6 millimeters broad. Petals are few, oblong, obtuse, widely spreading, sometimes turned back. They are pinkish, the stamens are erect and numerous. They are white. The ovary is sunken in the branch. The style is pinkish and erect. The stigma lobes 3 or 4 and are white. Now there's a couple of things about that description that have me scratching my head a little bit. One is the flower. So the flower being 6 millimeters in diameter is very small. I measured the bloom on this plant. It almost consistently for all the blooms to be about 2.5 centimeters in diameter. That is huge in comparison to what is being described here. It also goes on to say a few other small things. So it's saying that the type, meaning the one that was originally described, was found in Sao Paulo, Brazil. The distribution was the states of Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And here it goes on to say some things that are a little bit iffy about this. So it says, we have referred Rhipsalis pacheco-leonis here after studying living specimens of Dissimilis and specimens from the type collection obtained by Dr. Rose in 1950. And here they have a collection number, it was 20707. Here it kind of goes on to say that there was something that was called Rhipsalis setulosa that was published as a synonym of Rhipsalis dissimilis variety setulosa. It gives some illustrations from some different sort of publications. Sometimes I look those publications up, like sometimes they're in different languages, but a lot of times if you look them up, you can actually find them. Here it goes on to say that the plates, so the plates in this book, so plate number 19, figures 5 and 6, shows the 2 diverse forms which this plant takes, as does also plate 32, figures 6 and 7. So plate 32 over here, that's figure 6, that's figure 7. The specimens were collected by Dr. Rose in the state of Rio de Janeiro in 1915 and are a part of the type material of Rhipsalis pacheco-leonis. So it seems more like they were doing something and decided that for some strange reason this Rhipsalis pacheco-leonis and Rhipsalis dissimilis were the same thing. But I think that there are things about that description that genuinely make me believe that what was being described in this book was Rhipsalis pacheco-leonis, what we know today as Rhipsalis pacheco-leonis. Here we have the Cactus Lexicon by Backeberg. There are some things about this book that are kind of interesting, like the abundance of species in this book that probably shouldn't be in here. What happened at this time is that pretty much anything that had a erumpant growth or flowers coming out where, the areoles were hidden in the branches was kind of moved into Lepismium. So here we have Lepismium dissimile or dissimile instead of Dissimilis. So it was changed. The taxon changed here. So it basically says that the body was strongly branching. The main stems are ribbed or cylindric to 1 centimeters in diameter. These shoots are slender, ribbed. They can also be terate, so they can also be round. Bristly at first. Once again, we see that the flower is 6 millimeters in diameter, borne laterally, white with a pink center. The fruit is purple and compressed, and it was found in Brazil. Clearly, that is just not describing this plant. So either there is another plant that was out there that was described as Rhipsalis dissimilis that is kind of close to this plant, or they just kept adopting the description for Rhipsalis pacheco-leonis. So now we get into kind of a little bit of an interesting thing. Now we see a description in this book for Lepismium Marnierianum. This one was actually described quite a bit later, and it looks like it was described maybe in a publication or something. I don't know. It's a little bit confusing there, but it basically says in 1963. Now this one says that the body is laxly branching, erect at first, later arching. The shoots are dimorphic. In juvenile plants, they are 5 to 6 millimeters in diameter with 5 low, slender angles. The crowded areoles with several erect to oppressed white bristles to 1 centimeter long. Later, shoots are 1 to 2 centimeters in diameter. They're subterrate at first, then 3 to 4 angled. These angles sometimes slightly offset and somewhat prominent towards the areole. Young shoots are more bluish green. Older ones are more dirty olive green. Areoles on young shoots short and weakly felty, with small red scales. Those on older shoots are stout, with dense projecting tufts of wool to over 1 centimeter long, at most with solitary bristles. The flower is concolorous white. It is 1 to 1.5 centimeters in diameter, often paired or ternate, with the ovaries sunken. The petals are crowded, obtuse, and 5 millimeters broad. The fruit is carmine pink, subspherical with dried floral remains. The seeds are 1 millimeter large, glossy black, boat-shaped. And the origin here has a question mark. So it says here as well that a very characteristic species of which the origin remains unknown. It has been shown by experiments with seed sowing at the Botanical Garden Les Cerdes that the plants come true from seed. So they were very obviously describing this plant. Now in the United States, this plant quite often went under the name Rhipsalis dissimilis form Marnierianum or Marnieriana. There's also something in here where it says there's a figure. I've got to be honest, I have never looked, but it says there is one. So I'm curious to see figure 180. It says figure 183. So there it is, right there. We see a little picture. It's not a great picture, but I can generally make out the details in those branches. And I definitely can sit here and say, yeah, that's the same plant. And you can see the fruits on it. Very, very cool. So the flower size still didn't quite make it there. So I'm not sure what was going on with the flower size. There was something very strange with the measurement, how they measured it, where they measured it. I don't really know. And then later on, we end up with Hunt's book, and Hunt's description of the plant. It still doesn't have flowers that large in that description. However, the pictures of the flowers and everything, they definitely match. And there is no distinction in Hunt's book, the New Cactus Lexicon, between Marnieriana, Dissimilis, and epiphyllanthoides. There's no distinction there. They are all just Rhipsalis, Dissimilis, and they're described. Now, the really big difference, there are a lot of genuine differences between form Dissimilis and form epiphyllanthoides, but the major difference is the flower color. So the flowers on epiphyllanthoides are yellow, and epiphyllanthoides has its own strange problems. But here I kind of want to show another plant of this that I have purchased. This one came from, I believe, Cacti and Hage. And I think this one's great because if you have the New Cactus Lexicon, you can definitely see the strong resemblance there. And you see the resemblance between these two plants, absolutely. But I think that this one in particular has, the branches are a little bit rounder. They're a little bit less triangular, I guess. And I want to be very careful about that because only some of the branches on this plant are triangular, but there was enough of them that it might cause confusion for a person between whether or not this was Rhipsalis Trigona or whether or not it was Rhipsalis Dissimilis. Having said that, here is Rhipsalis Trigona. I've done an in-depth video on this. The in-depth video that I did on this was using this particular plant. Obviously, this is just sort of rooted cuttings. It's a little more rooted now, but even now I can still tell, the distinction here. One of the things in the description in Hunt's book, the New Cactus Lexicon, noting about how to tell these two plants apart, because they are a little hard to tell apart, but the number one thing is going to be that Rhipsalis Trigona branches are triangular consistently, whereas Rhipsalis Dissimilis, it might get some triangular branches, but it'll have branches that are a little bit rounder. The angles are a little bit softer. It can get branches that have way more angles. There is a second Rhipsalis Trigona that I've picked up recently, and here it's desiccated, so the angles probably look quite a bit sharper, but they are always very consistently three-angled. Always, always, always. Whereas these, looking at them together, you can see they're always a little bit rounder. It's a little bit softer just in general. A couple of the other things that we can tell here is that Rhipsalis Trigona, I don't think that I mentioned, because I did a deep dive on Rhipsalis Trigona and how to determine a real Rhipsalis Trigona. But one of the things about Rhipsalis Trigona is that the flower is generally solitary. So there will generally only be one flower per areole. And when I was examining this, I actually noticed that there's something happening right here. So it looks like perhaps this little cutting is trying to do something. It looks like a bud. I'm not entirely sure, but that's pretty cool. There's just a little bump there. But you can see here, after those singular flowers would have bloomed, it left these nice, craters in the branches and little tufts of wool and stuff. Rhipsalis Dissimilis, you can see a couple of things. The buds a lot of times will form right out of the ends of the branches. You can see that the flowers will often form in twos, like it was saying, in twos or in threes. Again, right out of the end here, there's two flowers there. So that's something that's a little bit different, because I know in pictures these plants can look remarkably similar. Really and truly, they can look very similar in photographs. So here you can also see that there is a flower and that is about as close to the tip of the branch that those flowers seem to get. So it doesn't really seem to, well, that one might have come a little bit more out of the tip, but it seems that the areole on Rhipsalis trigona is less likely to form right at the end of the tip of the branch segments, where it seems like Marnieriana quite often will have areoles, right at the ends and will bloom out of those. Also in the description, it discussed the red scales. I've discussed this in other videos, but here on new growth, you can see what it's talking about. In the juvenile growth, it can have these very long little hairs. You can see the very prominent red scales that are covering the areole or where the areole is buried. And those little red scales that are like that, it's a modified leaf. And you'll see that a lot in the growth on Rhipsalis Dissimilis. All the species of Rhipsalis Dissimilis, or all of the forms. So here is form epiphyllanthoides. I never thought I would have this plant, but I am so totally excited to have it. You can see it's got red areoles on this too. This particular clone, it grows in just like these little sections like this. Generally, it grows more on rocks, and it will grow upwards in a bunch of these it'll grow in like a little bush of these little segments. It's really cool. I think it's absolutely amazing. It had a new growth at the tip, but I accidentally hit it. So it's forming a new little growth down there. And you can see that it looks wildly different here. So there's not going to be any confusing that really with any other Rhipsalis. It would be very difficult. And like I said, it has yellow flowers. We have a couple of interesting problems here, because here is a Rhipsalis Dissimilis that I purchased from, it looks like I purchased this one from Cacti, so it looks like I imported this. Now, I'm not entirely sure what's going on with this plant. I'm not entirely sure if this is Rhipsalis Dissimilis, form Dissimilis, or if this is epiphyllanthoides, but there is some craziness happening in epiphyllanthoides itself that we can kind of get into. I'm not entirely sure, so kind of have to wait for this one to bloom and stuff. But I do want to point out here, you can see a lot of this juvenile growth, the growth that has the spines, the 5 low ribs kind of thing. So I do want to point out, and I have seen many times, that younger plants of Rhipsalis Dissimilis can have that kind of growth, and the description says it. This right here is also supposed to be Rhipsalis Dissimilis, form epiphyllanthoides. Obviously, these two plants are wildly different. So I'm not exactly sure what's going on with this plant exactly. You can see it's got like those crazy red scales. You can see that it's got a differing kind of, I guess, growth pattern here with differing kinds of scales, the areoles. You can see the patterning is very different. So I'm not sure what's up with that, but I have seen that identified before as Rhipsalis Dissimilis, form epiphyllanthoides. So like I said, there are some iffy things going on in Rhipsalis Dissimilis just in general. I do want to take a look just at Rhipsalis pacheco-leonis again. So Rhipsalis pacheco-leonis, same thing, can get like that kind of caterpillary growth. This one I imported, and it's very indicative of the way that this grows. I think that when you look at these two plants together and you see this kind of branching pattern, you can probably see how it was that the plants might have gotten confused with each other, just superficially. And the flowers on these, they are small. They have a few petals. They don't have the same, anywhere near as grand, as many petals. The flower is nowhere near as large. The flower is kind of pinkish, sometimes at the tips, sometimes in the center. It has kind of these, darkish, reddish kind of berries. So you can see how it might be that Rhipsalis Dissimilis in those old descriptions was actually Rhipsalis pacheco-leonis. And even when I read the descriptions for Rhipsalis pacheco-leonis, the descriptions are disturbingly similar to these old descriptions of Rhipsalis Dissimilis. Going back to this gorgeous plant, I love this plant. I absolutely think this plant is wonderful. So I think in my top 10 Rhipsalis, this was number 1 in that video. And I do know that I said that if I ever managed to get my hands on form epiphyllanthoides, that would be probably number 1. I pretty much just really like Rhipsalis Dissimilis just in general. And actually, on that note, I have an extreme fondness for all of the Rhipsalis that are in the subgenus Calamorhipsalis. So there's a wonderful study, if you ever get a chance to read it. You can get it at Bio1. So I think it's bio1.org. The author of this study is Alice Calvente, and the paper is a new subgeneric classification of Rhipsalis. And so one of the things that was done here is that the number of subgenus in Rhipsalis was reduced from, I believe, 5 down to 3. Now there's Rhipsalis subgenus Rhipsalis, Rhipsalis subgenus Erythrorhipsalis, and Rhipsalis subgenus Calamorhipsalis. Now Calamorhipsalis is very interesting because the identifying characteristic, the major identifying characteristic for a Rhipsalis to appear in that subgenus is that the pericarpel is conspicuously immersed in the areole. So what that means is generally it's going to have erumpent flower buds. The branches are going to be kind of erumpent. They're the kind of plants where the branches, a lot of times when they grow out, they'll form like little loops because the tips of the branch is getting stuck in that buried kind of areole. And the reason why I say that is because that's so very specific to that particular subgenus that it can help people identify what their Rhipsalis is. Now I'm going to read the list of all of the Rhipsalis that belong in that subgenus. And to preface that, before I do, I want to note that whenever I'm saying just this species, like Rhipsalis dissimilis, I mean all the forms of Rhipsalis dissimilis. The same thing of like when I'm saying this species of Rhipsalis flacosa, I mean all of the subspecies of Rhipsalis flacosa. So if your plant has these immersed flower buds, it is no doubt in Rhipsalis subgenus Calamorhipsalis and will be one of the following plants: Rhipsalis dissimilis, Rhipsalis flacosa, Rhipsalis holleri, Rhipsalis nevis armandii, Rhipsalis pacheco-leonis, Rhipsalis paradoxa, Rhipsalis puniciodiscus, or Rhipsalis trigona. That's a very helpful note because I think sometimes that's mildly confusing for people. Let's take a little bit of a closer look here. So again, we looked at this juvenile growth. It can get a whole lot more hairy and a whole lot more ribby than that. I've seen it, some crazy interesting pictures. It talked about the raised bit, particularly around the areole. I think we see that often called in the descriptions podaria. It literally just means a little protruding lump of something. A lot of the plants in that subgenus have that, the little protruding bits at the areole. Flacosa definitely is one that will also have it in varying degrees. Here you see those beautiful buds. Here, if we can get right up in there, you can see how it's pushing its way out, so you can see how it was buried. The back sides of these flowers, oh, it's such a pretty flower. I'm so in love with these. Look at how beautiful that is. So it's got those beautiful hints of pink, even hints of a little bit yellowish. If I had to truly describe it, like it's kind of a little more peachy to me, I think, in person up close, because you can see that it's white, but it has this like slight cast of yellow or something. So it's kind of a peachy looking thing because it also has those pink tips. And just look at how beautiful. And then you can see like the fur, the tufts of wool that are coming out of the areoles there. And so post blooming, those tufts of wool, they can get really prominent because of what's going on there. Like, right here, see all that wool? So kind of what's going on here is that, I think there's something's trying to happen right there, but what's going on there is that wool is actually in the areole. And so whenever the flower bud forms or new branches form and it punches out. That's what makes it so that the wool kind of comes out. But you can see sometimes the wool just comes out. I think because it's super woolly, so that's really great. I just love those flowers. And it seems like it's really, really floriferous. You know, I purchased this one on Etsy. So I purchased this one on Etsy. Oh, there's a beautiful little red buds. So darn pretty, those little red buds. Ugh. So I purchased this one on Etsy. I think I purchased it, I think it was actually last year that I purchased it. So I think maybe it was like last summer when I bought this. And, you know, the cuttings rooted really easily. Everything about it has been very easy. I mean, it obviously has bloomed very easily, and I have seen lots of bloom pictures of this one. So I think this is one that is just really floriferous and really easy just in general, and absolutely gorgeous. Now, it can get a little bit wonky, I will say. You know, like some of the Rhipsalis, like you can see how its branches are kind of like going all over the place. It can get a little bit wonky in its growth like that. But I mean, I really love the wild child ones anyway, so it's just fantastic. I freaking absolutely love this plant. I love those flowers. I love it. I hope that you've enjoyed looking at Rhipsalis dissimilis with me. Thank you for watching, and happy cacti growing.